Hi, everybody. Welcome to our fourth Monday program series. I'm going to get us kicked off. I'm sorry we're a few minutes late, but I hope that gave everyone some time to join us. And I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Dorothy King. She chairs our education committee and puts together our Monday program. So please, Dr. King, take it away.
Thank you, Ashley. As Ashley said, I'm the chair of the education committee here at Historic Harrisburg Association, and welcome to our fourth Monday program, and also happy Black History Month. Tonight, you will hear a presentation by Ryan Unger. David Morrison, our executive director, is going to be introducing him in more detail, but just so you know, Ryan Unger is with the Harrisburg Chamber of Commerce, and he's going to be talking about a history of the chamber in connection with the City Beautiful movement. And we also will be welcoming Caleb Jackson, who is a local historian and a very good friend of Historic Harrisburg. But David will be introducing them shortly. Our next fourth Monday program will be on Monday, March 27th, and it's in celebration of Women's History Month, and it is entitled The Bridges She Built. And it will center on women from the past and the present who were and are involved in bridge design and building. Our panelists will be Veronica Martin from Penn and Janice Links, who's with the Friends of the Shepford Bridge. Following the presentation tonight, there will be a question and answer period facilitated by our communications director, Ashley Christ. So she'll be taking us out this evening. And now, thank you for your kind attention. And David Morrison, our executive director, will introduce our speakers. David?
Thank you, Dorothy. We're delighted to have Ryan Unger as our speaker tonight. Ryan became the CEO of the Harrisburg Regional Chamber and Creedic a little less than a year ago. And I had the opportunity to meet with Ryan shortly after he took office last summer and discover very quickly that he has extensive knowledge of the history of the chamber and how it relates to the history of Harrisburg. Ryan, by the way, is a neighbor of ours. He lives literally a couple of doors away here on Verbeck Street. And before that, he lived absolutely next door to us in the Coba apartment building, historic building right next door to us. Prior to joining the chamber, which he did succeeding David Black, who retired last summer, Ryan was the CEO of the Team Pennsylvania, which is a kind of a, perhaps Ryan can explain it better, but it's separate from state government, but it coordinates activities between the public and private sector. And so that teamwork between the public and private sector is facilitated by Team Pennsylvania. Prior to that, he was with the CETA Council of Governments just up the river from us in the Lewisburg area, and also the Greater Susquehanna Valley Chamber of Commerce, which is also up the Susquehanna River from Harrisburg in the Shamokin Dam area. He's a graduate of Elizabethtown College, and he is currently the president of the Alumni Association of Elizabethtown College. So we're really pleased that he has such a great depth of involvement in civic and community affairs throughout central Pennsylvania. And we know that the chamber has a tremendous history that ties so closely to some of the things that we're very proud of that are what make Harrisburg such a beautiful and attractive capital city. So with that, Ryan, I will turn it over to you, and thank you for being our speaker.
Thank you, Dave. Let me get my presentation up here. Great. Well, again, David, I appreciate the opportunity to present today. And I actually, maybe as Dave talked about in my bio, I'm a member personally, and then also as an organization, we are pillar members of Historic Harrisburg and value the work that you do in our community and how important it really is. And for those of you tuned in looking for an in-depth conversation about City Beautiful, that's on me to a certain extent as I dug deeper into this topic about the history of the chamber and our organization, felt that this is almost too much to cover probably in one little bit. So I'm going to talk primarily about the chamber and since it became the Harrisburg Board of Trade in the early part of the 20th century, and some of the big projects that we worked on over the years, and why I personally was attracted to this opportunity as well. A little bit of the background to go into a little more detail from what Dave had discussed. I joined the chamber this past summer in July. Was named in May, but I've been a resident for the past 10 years in Harrisburg, and all 10 years in the city of Harrisburg. First, for a brief period of time in Angleton, near the corner of Penn and Harris Street, and then moving to Midtown, as Dave articulated, just next door in the Coba. Really one of the first folks to live in that apartment building, and then now in a house this past summer on Burbeck. So just cat a corner from where historic Harrisburg continues to call home. And I was a past president of Team Pennsylvania. And we were, as Dave really did a great job explaining, the Commonwealth's public-private partnership for economic and workforce development. And I had a chance to work there for 10 years, the last 6 as our president. I graduated with a degree in communications and a minor in theater, so no history there, but I would argue that I used the bulk of my liberal arts elective credits to take history and political science classes. In fact, one of my professors was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Winpenny, would be very happy about the presentation that you'll see next month. His historic expertise was actually in bridges, with a brook on the building of the Brooklyn Bridge, and it sparked that in me, and was an interesting history there as well. And it's a passion that I've had for a good part of my life, in terms of the importance of history and reading and understanding history. I joke with some folks that I was the youngest member of the Northumberland County Historical Society, as I attended meetings with my father throughout elementary and middle school, and learning about the genealogy of my family up in the Sunbury area, but also the deep heritage and history, similar to what we have here in Harrisburg, that we have at the confluence of the north and west branch of the Susquehanna River. My own personal focus and a lot of the research or the work that I tend to do, and a lot of the reading, is on presidential history. In fact, I've been to about 18 to 20 of presidential birthplaces or libraries, many of them as a child. It was something that I said to my family that I wanted to be a part of every single vacation that I could go on. And my sister joked that she coped by pretending that they were dollhouses throughout my childhood. I got a chance to visit those throughout the United States. Before we talk about the history, I want to talk a little bit about the present. It's important for me to talk about this every time that I get a chance to talk about the chamber and who we are. As a regional organization, we have 900 members throughout Cumberland, Dauphin, and Perry counties. The chamber, again, I'll talk in a little bit here, came about in the early part of the 20th century, but is born out of the Harrisburg Board of Trade. So that's why we say over the last 130 years. Our 900 plus members represent about 1/3 of the workforce here within those 3 counties. We are a merged chamber and EDC, and I'll explain that history a little bit as we get closer to the present day in terms of what that means. And we are a 5-star accredited chamber. Less than 5% of the chambers nationwide, only a handful within the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania are accredited by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce as a 5-star chamber, and we are really proud of that work. When I came to work at the chamber, I talked about how we were going to do our work, and I want to continue to echo this when I have a chance again to speak and address folks in the public. It's important to me and to our team that our work is inclusive. So I will be talking about that as part of our history as we go forward here. It's important that we are a data-driven organization as well. Our business members use data every day. There's no reason we shouldn't to judge, engage our programs, and drive our work going forward. As you can see by tonight, it's important to me that our team be present in our communities. As David well found out, I rarely turn down an opportunity to speak or meet. I think it's important. A lot of folks look to the chamber for leadership and to provide support. It's important that we also listen and be there when we can. And finally, that we be unapologetically, relentlessly positive about our region. We'll see that in our communications. You'll hear that from me. We are proud of the Harrisburg region and will continue to fly that flag in the days, months, and years ahead. So really what this presentation came about was a conversation that Dave and I had when, as he said, I first joined the staff here at the Chamber and sat down with Dave in my office here at 3211 North Friend Street. And one of the things that drew me to the opportunity was not my dog Teddy or my dog Max, but when I would walk my dogs on Riverfront Park as I live in Midtown and walk up and down there, was a sign that I would see every time at the front corner of Front and Riley Street. And I think many of us know about this and Muriel Lloyd Dock, and we hear about City Beautiful, but I would always stop as a former employee of a Chamber of Commerce and always focus on that December 20th, 1900 speech to the Harrisburg Board of Trade. And that concept and idea that Muriel Lloyd Dock was inspired by work that was done in Chicago and Daniel Burnham. If you have read Devil in the White City, not this part about the serial killer, but the part about the landscape architect and the work that was done at the Chicago World Fair, born about many ideas in beautification and beautification for beautification's sake and enhancing the quality of life. And Harrisburg was one of the first cities to embrace that and is considered one of the more successful applications of that. But Muriel Lloyd Dock came to the Harrisburg Board of Trade to engage the business community in that project and in this endeavor and effort. And as you can see on the sign, the movement produced our city's park system, including Riverfront Park, which I walk in almost every single day, and other civic improvements, which I'll talk a little bit about as well, which includes Wildwood Park, the Capitol Park expansion as well. But it should be noted, and we'll talk later as well, that many of these improvements also came to the detriment of our Black community, our immigrant community as well. Right near where that sign is, and near the Sunken Gardens, was a community called Hardscrabble. And those are the old 8th Ward, which now, thanks to the hard work of Historic Harrisburg and many others in the community, we have recognized and will continue to recognize on the grounds of the Capitol, behind the Capitol, those acres that were put in to help build on the expansion of the Capitol Park. And you saw a great public effort done by the Harrisburg newspapers and others to build on these efforts to make Harrisburg a place that is not only the center of commerce, which we'll talk about, but is aesthetically pleasing as well. As we all well know, Harrisburg is a little bit younger than a lot of its neighbors here in South Central Pennsylvania. And it was a small industrial town, I'd say somewhat sleepy, when it was selected to be our capital, and that spurred development and industry. And Muriel Lloyd Dock really said it's about time that we can be better in Harrisburg. And we strive for that and to embrace that in our work at the Harrisburg Regional Chamber and Credit. So a little bit about the history of our organization. I'm going to do this in a pretty sequential manner. And many thanks to Dave Black, who passed this on to me, because one of the first things I asked for was the history. I believe Dan Miller did a lot of this research as part of the Chamber's 100th anniversary in 1914. And I have poured through, and as I told Dave, I've got about 60 to 70 pages of newspaper stories and chamber minutes, and I've boiled it down, don't worry, not just 70 or 80 or 90 slides, but to about 20 slides talking here about the history of the chamber and those big projects that we played a role in. And it begins in 1914, but we'll take a step back, because in 1913, the Harrisburg newspaper said this would be the most important year coming up of this city. Incredible investments in public works with a new commission form of government. This includes the Riverfront Wall, Spring Creek Sewer, and then a big project as I sit here and look at the Susquehanna River after much bickering, quote unquote, in the newspaper, the paving of Front Street in 1913. And it's also when the dialogue and conversation began that we needed a different type of organization with bigger duties beyond just being a board of trade to encourage commerce and partnership, but to take on what I like to call big swings here in the region. The Harrisburg Board of Trade had been around since 1884, and working with, at that time, the National Chamber of Commerce, there was recognized the importance of getting together and standing together in an effective organization that will promote those things which make for the permanent upbuilding of any city. Pretty good mission charge for what we continue to do to this day. And in January of 1914, 200 businesses from the city formed the chamber. John Fox was our first president, a former state senator. Prominent business leaders that were there at the time include Andrew Patterson, J.W. Bowman, Henderson Gilbert, George Tripp, David Kaufman, and E.J. Stackpole. Some of those neighbors will be familiar. I can tell you the dues were $25 and up. They're a little bit higher now for the organization, but that's what they were set in 1914. And again, back to I want to point out that I made some of our core values that I talked about there during the search, and I talked to the committee. But I'll tell you, in the initial news story that talked about the founding of the chamber, it was said, quote unquote, the policy of the new organization will not be one of criticism or complaint. There are many ways we believe in which the Chamber of Commerce and City Council can work together. It's important to me that our organization continue to live out that ethos in our work. Again, remember, relentlessly unapologetically positive in this concept and idea that we can create an environment and a place that we can work together. The first offices were in the Kunkel building at 301 Market Street. Rent was $64 a month. It's gone up a little bit. Of course, that's now student housing, I believe, and apartments, many of them for Harrisburg University as well. And J. Horace McFarland, and a leader of the City Beautiful movement, was an initial leader within the Chamber of Commerce. One of the first big projects that the Chamber undertook was the Penn Harris Hotel. Not Penn Harris Hotel, many of you know, sits on the ground right now where the Strawberry Square currently is. But with the travel that was happening in at Harrisburg, that the business community and government leaders felt that the importance of the city and the opening of the new Capitol, a lot of this was spurred by the beauty and grandiosity of the new Capitol that was there in Harrisburg, that a hotel needed to meet that demand, but also meet up that architectural heft that was provided by the Capitol. So Penn Harris Hotel was founded. The initial stock was actually managed and sold by the Chamber of Commerce itself. And you can see there what it appeared to be until it was about in the middle of the century torn down. In 1919 and 1920 is when the real marketing of the city. And I really found it interesting that the Harrisburg Chamber of Commerce's really first marketing slogan, you can see there, was a heart of distribution. Even 100 years ago, we were a center, an epicenter of logistics and distribution. Of course, much of that at the time, if not all of it, was through the railroads in the largest industry for the region. Just last week, I had a chance to visit UPS is one of the largest distribution centers they're building in the country, and they're building it right here in the Harrisburg region. It's been a part of our heritage for over 100 years. This is not something new. Just the way that we're moving goods has changed over the years. Also, improving the city in 1920, it was designed that there were inadequate utilities for the growth of the city. And a name that I would encourage you to read more about, Vance McCormick. He was the mayor from 1902 to 1905, one of the more, if not the most prominent and well-known citizens in Harrisburg's history, DNC chair, and was the chair of the American delegation to commission and negotiate peace at Versailles, an ally of Woodrow Wilson. But he was also, in my eyes, the most important thing, chaired the special committee to investigate light and power for the Harrisburg Chamber of Commerce. So a lot of work was done there to make recommendations to improve the utilities, infrastructure, and work of the city. To tie it back to present day, we were incredibly supportive of continued infrastructure investment here in Harrisburg, and supportive of federal legislation as well to do that. In 1923, fire struck our headquarters there in a Kunkel building. It was not until 1940, and I'll talk about that, a new permanent office was found, kind of floated around for a period of time. As a result of the fire, only the minutes of the board of directors meetings, membership list, and dues invoices were saved. I always say those dues invoices. It was also around that time, a short time later, that we did an initial economic survey. Again, the more things change, the more they remain the same, as it's something that we're actually working on right now as an organization. But we felt it was important in 1928 that we better understand what the data was within the city of Harrisburg. Where was the economy going in our region, and what was driving it? What we found at the time was the same type of drivers that we have today: logistics, state employment, and then also a big driver at the time, of course, was steel and allied products, so textiles, things of that nature. And that makes sense. At the time, the Bethlehem Steelworks, which were in Stilton. Railroads were $2 million in revenue a month, significant amount of money at the time in 1928. There was also, as a part of that first initial economic survey, a series of recommendations for the chamber and region. And again, these kind of ring true to what we do today. There is no more important department of work for the Chamber of Commerce than the fostering of present industries and the developing of new payroll producers. And then we recommend a committee of 100 composed of the leading businessmen of Harrisburg, representatives from each of the suburban towns from both east and the west side to the Susquehanna River. And again, I see that as the first sprinkles of regionalism in our organization, a recommendation that we bring in everyone to the table to try to help move and advance Harrisburg and the region forward. And housing was seen as a big issue there. Couldn't get a home for less than $4,000 in the city of Harrisburg. Also, in 1930, the capital city airport was founded by the Harrisburg Chamber of Commerce, yet again, and operated by the Chamber until 1936. Of course, now on the site in North County there, in the present capital city airport as well. We'll talk a little bit about the evolution of both airports as we go forward here. In that year, between 1928 and 30, we attracted 11 new businesses, 7 of them distribution, similar to what we see even right now. In 1933, similar to what we've just done this past year, we saw a creation of a flurry of federal programs and agencies under Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal that were intended to rescue our economy from disaster and the Great Depression. They include the National Industrial Recovery Act, Recovery Administration, Public Works Administration, and the Chamber played a leading role in helping businesses access those programs and managing those programs locally where appropriate. We served as a liaison between the regional business community and federal government in interpreting, carrying out, and at times even assisting in enforcement of the new mandates and requirements from Washington. So 1936, again, disaster struck, as many of us know, the 1936 flood. And the Chamber, yet again, worked with businesses to provide them help and support. This is on 2nd Street, looking down near Kelker. You can see the floods near where the offices currently are for Historic Harrisburg. And the city provided support, the Chamber provided support yet again to city businesses. 1940, as I mentioned earlier, we finally found a new permanent home in what was City Hall at one point there at Walnut Street. This is our home for more than 50 years until we moved to where we're at and where I sit currently at 3211 North Front Street in 1998. Real significant move in 1941 is the Chamber lobbied the Navy for security reasons and other reasons that they needed an inland depot. Most of the depot was in Norfolk or Anacostia down in Washington, D.C. So right off, either the Bay or the Atlantic Ocean or the Anacostia River. And the thought was, as war approached, that there was an inland depot necessary, and also to assist logistics throughout the country. The Chamber was down in Washington often, arguing that we had a great site in our region off this little known road called the Carlisle Pike. And the New Cumberland Depot, $15 million granted by the Department of Defense. And we know to this day the incredible economic impact that that has had throughout our region and continues to have in Cumberland County. And Harrisburg continued to support the efforts of the war, whether that was the endeavors by the Bethlehem Steelworks in Steelton, Olmsted Air Force Base, which is now the present-day Harrisburg International Airport, went from 815 employees to a peak of the war at 17,000 employees. Again, as you heard earlier, I grew up in a town of 10,000. It's really kind of hard for me to comprehend that. In just 2 years at the beginning of the war, it went from 800 to 10,000 employees, both civilian and military, at the base. In 1950s, post-war, the chamber began to do a lot of work around tourism and what is now the Hershey-Harrisburg Visitors Bureau, which is right upstairs here at our offices, now a separate organization. Those efforts were done by the chamber and the business community at the time, helping find hotel rooms, help building out those assets, and doing that work as well. In 1957, the chamber worked with the city to try to encourage additional development on City Island. Why not might seem excited, it was mentioned in multiple histories that 1,200 parking spaces were added. That was a big move in 1957 to encourage additional development in the city of Harrisburg. At the time in the 1950s, our chamber had about 2,000 more members than we do now, 2,900 members, the largest in the country for a city of its size. In addition, we worked with the Baltimore Chamber of Commerce to construct a road called I-83. In the late 1940s, a group from the Harrisburg Chamber met with a group from the Baltimore Chamber and said, we're doing a lot of work between us and we need an interstate. So as the Eisenhower interstate system was developed, those leaders worked together to lobby for the construction of I-83. And in fact, the first bus to ride there, you'll see a lot if you go through our offices, pictures of Goodwill cruises, which are important throughout our history. One of the first, according to the records that I have, was a Goodwill cruise bus coming back home from I believe from the port of Baltimore on I-83 was the first ride. So I-83 was an effort begun in conversation with the Baltimore Chamber of Commerce and pushed to be developed in the late 1950s. Olmsted Air Force Base did continue to expand after the war, and there was an effort underway. There was some consideration to potentially move the Air Force Base even as early as 1957 because of the large runway necessary to land some of the larger jets that were being built. And in buying local, the Chamber of Commerce developed a partnership with Bethlehem Steelworks, using Steelworks slag to expand the Air Force Base and at least putting at bay for that point in time, Olmsted Air Force Base, either severely limiting its size or potentially moving away. Also in 1959, as I mentioned earlier, in 1928 were the first kind of seeds of regionalism in our organization. In 1959, the name did change to be the Harrisburg Area Chamber of Commerce. In 1960, the industrial expansion in our region continued to go. The chamber worked with AMP at the time to purchase 42 acres for the region's largest private industrial park. 1961, I-81 siting, which doesn't sound like it'd be that huge of an issue or a deal, but I think a very interesting program would be to try to better understand I-81 alone. If you remember the names of Congressman Flood and others, they I-81, which was at the time known as kind of the Anthracite Expressway, cut right through Harrisburg. And where would it go? Would it go to lower Paxton Township? Where would it go? Would it cut through some communities? The chamber was stuck. We support infrastructure, as I just mentioned, with I-83, but how would we play a role? The newspaper stories that I read and the board meeting minutes talked about the chamber seeking to maintain a dialogue with all sides, to try to bring people together to try to find some type of compromise as I-81 was going to go through our region. How can we do it in a way with the least amount of disruption to some of the outlying communities in the Harrisburg region? One of the recommendations from that was to expand Cameron Street out to meet the interstate a bit and expand Cameron Street there from the farm show to allow egress there as well. In 1964, which at the time was considered to be the biggest shock to our region's economy, Secretary McNamara announced the closure of Olmsted Air Force Base. It came as a surprise to the chamber, to the business community, and many around. At the time, there was 12,000 civilian and military workers. At the time, the chamber fought tooth and nail for the closure, working with a name that will sound familiar, Cliff Jones, who was Secretary of Commerce at the time, and also with Governor Scranton to both fight the closure of Olmsted Air Force Base, but at the same time, develop an adaptive reuse and comprehensive plan for that Air Force Base if they were not successful. The clock was ticking. It was a 5-year drawdown. In 1969, it would be finalized. Behind me, you can see there is an award for the closure. Also here is a proclamation from Governor Scranton as well, because it was considered at the time one of the more successful, if not the most successful, pivot from what would be dire news to a revitalization strategy for a military base closure. We had the relocation of Freehoff Corporation as one of the big 3 linchpins from that comprehensive plan. Also, Penn State Harrisburg, as you can see. In fact, if you go up there, the Olmsted buildings, their main administrative building, I'm on the board of advisors for Penn State Harrisburg. But the first students began to go there near the end of the 1960s. And it was set the foundation for, at the time, what they called Penn State Capital City campus. And of course, Harrisburg International Airport. And that international airport designation was given a few years later by getting US Customs to go there. So then you also had access from all sides and all avenues, getting the moniker of the Harrisburg International Airport. A really great moment, taking what would be considered to many a death knell with the closure of Olmsted, and then cutting the ribbon in 1969 for Harrisburg International Airport. 1972, we know what happens there. Flood causes loss of our records again. As 1 month after the storm, we held meetings with other regional chambers to seek additional federal assistance for those communities that were stricken by the flood. We had an industry liaison committee that went out and completed a flood survey for the Army Corps of Engineers. And in 1977, our chamber president, Barry Johnson, went to Washington on behalf of the region to Representative Alan Ertl's attempt to update the Flood Control Act to continue to assist our region going forward. I mentioned earlier, we are a merged chamber and EDC. In 1984, the Capital Region Economic Development Corporation was founded. I think many of us know there is a West Shore Chamber of Commerce, and there's been many attempts through the years to get the chambers to merge together. At the time, William Alexander and Rothman, where the chairs of the chambers, respectively, Mr. Rothman in the West Shore, Mr. Alexander here at the Harrisburg Chamber. And while a merger could not happen, they said, why don't we work together, at least in one area specifically, in joint economic development? So CREDIC is a public-private partnership involving the West Shore and Harrisburg chambers and the Cumberland, Dauphin, and Perry counties, primarily responsible, in the city of Harrisburg, primarily responsible for business attraction and expansion. Once founded, site relocations increased 600% and $179 million in investments from the early years, galvanized by site attraction and relocation efforts, marketing campaigns, and the like. In 1994, it was sought to try to bring CREDIC and the Harrisburg Regional Chamber and others around an umbrella organization called the Susquehanna Alliance. And then a few years later, an effort out of that came called Envision. And there was a lot of big victories from Envision. Envision was an idea that within Cumberland, Dauphin, and Perry counties, we can come together to try to do something bigger. And that work recommended two big things: that we needed a life sciences campus and a polytechnical university. The group went with Mayor Reed, Dave Schenkweiler, and others at the time to Richmond, inspired by the pivot of, at the time, Commonwealth University to embrace engineering, connect with the business community. Harrisburg University was started up, and currently to its present day is an incredible asset and really growing at an unprecedented pace here in the city of Harrisburg. You can see the skyline literally changing because of that work that came about from that Envision activity. And then in 1998, Creedick and Chamber then relocated to where I am sitting at right now at 3211 North Front Street. And then the organization then began to merge and came a little bit closer together, as I now am both the president and CEO of both organizations. So we continue to do that work in terms of the economic development, lead generation, business loans, things of that nature. A lot of the work that a group called the Harrisburg Area Industrial Development Authority did for many years, work along near Wildwood Park, that industrial expansion out there and other areas around the city and region. Creedick now does, and we work jointly with the Chamber and Creedick. Now, I'm well aware that a lot of the stories I just told you were absent a large part of the history of the city of Harrisburg. And I mentioned the development of the Penn Harris Hotel. But a story not told about the Penn Harris Hotel is that it did not at the time allow African Americans to stay. And they were a big part of our workforce in this city. And to meet that need, the Booker T. Washington Hotel was founded. I'm going to talk a little bit about, it is Black History Month, talking about the history and heritage of Black businesses in the city of Harrisburg and how important they were and will continue to be into our future. The Booker T. Washington Hotel was at the southwest corner of 7th and Boas Street. There was an Eagle Hotel there as well that catered to workers of the Pennsylvania Railroad. It was a major facility, as you can well see. They were turned away from the city's white-owned and managed lodging facilities. It was operated actually by Morris Cowan, who was the head waiter at the downtown Penn Harris Hotel. He had the experience, and then he came to own that hotel. His wife took over the day-to-day management, and it continued its service until 1937. Also in existence was the Alexander Hotel in the same neighborhood there, the southeast corner of 7th and Hearst Streets. Operation then after that from 1937 to 1950. Another popular destination for African Americans seeking lodging during this period of discrimination. It also hosted political gatherings, such as the Democratic Colored First Voters League of Dauphin County in October of 1937. The hotel, along with the neighboring buildings, was demolished under urban renewal activities in the late 1950s. We talk about this growth, we have to look at this other side as well, and some of these stories too. The Jackson House, we all know about Jackson House. German Jackson came to Harrisburg from Virginia in 1920 to again work at the Penn Harris Hotel as a bellhop. But that same hotel did not allow African American guests. So Mr. Jackson and his wife opened the Jackson House, which has since, of course, crumbled, unfortunately, as the restaurant is still there. But the boarding house hotel it fell apart during some attempts at renovations recently at 1004 North 6th Street. Ella Fitzgerald stayed there, Louis Armstrong, all stayed there while performing in this city. It was built in 1884, collapsed in 2021. Site's been cleared, but the owner, from what I understand and talking to David, intends to rebuild that structure to its original architectural form and detail. A name that's familiar to a lot of folks. If you hear about Roland, you think about Roland Academy, but Ruth Roland, native of Stilton, founded the Roland School of Beauty Culture at 1321 North 6th Street. She was a teenager. She was a soloist and musician in many activities at the Wheatley branch of the YWCA. She was a sister, excuse me, of James Rowland, which Rowland Academy, as I mentioned, is named. She was active in programs and plays about Negro history, and many graduates of her school became professional beauticians. You can see it here. She was a part of initial workforce development activities and really trying to help the Harrisburg region, and her school was listed in the Green Book, as were many of the other institutions that I talked about a little bit earlier. And then we're going to hear from Caleb here, so I shouldn't talk too much more about this, David, because I know he'll be able to tell so much more. But of course, Jack's Hotel at 1208 North 6th Street, 12 guest rooms, was opened in April of 1946 by Caleb Jackson Sr. So that concludes my presentation, David. I know we want to have another one here quickly, and then I can answer some questions if there are any.
Thank you so much, Ryan. That was fantastic, and for including those elements of Harrisburg's African American business history. I don't believe Caleb is on the Zoom. He may be tuned in via Facebook Live, which means I don't think he'd be able to comment. But I will say that you covered beautifully the things that he would have mentioned. I will add that two things that, first of all, Jack's Hotel, his father's business, was more than just a hotel, and actually he had a barber shop and a pool hall, but more than that, Caleb tells me that it was a center of political and business activity. In other words, you went there to find out what was going on. If you were a leader in the Black community, or just anybody in the Black community who had interests in business affairs or political affairs, it was all discussed at Jack's Hotel and pool hall and barber shop. So Caleb grew up upstairs from that business there on the 1000 block of North 6th Street. That building is still there, been recently restored. And a year or so ago, we rebranded that entire neighborhood as Jackson Square, because there were two Jackson families, unrelated. Caleb Jackson Sr. and Jr. Were there at 1002 North 6th Street, and German Jackson, the proprietor of the Jackson House, with whom you mentioned, was unrelated, but his business was equally prominent, particularly in terms of catering to the nationally prominent visitors to Harrisburg, be they musicians or sports figures and so forth, who came to Harrisburg. They often stayed there. And I'll mention that German Jackson, as the doorman at the Penn Harris Hotel, he was able to skirt the embarrassment that would have happened to an African-American prominent visitor who would have been refused a room at the hotel by redirecting them to his property. And he did that in a very, very diplomatic and discreet way, so that it minimized what would have been embarrassment and perhaps worse feelings than that in that unfortunate era when that sort of thing was common. And it's amazing to hear from Caleb that there were so many businesses in that part of Harrisburg, that North 6th Street, North 7th Street part of Harrisburg, that thrived as Black-owned businesses, because really the economy was segregated to a large degree in those days. I mean, the Curtis Funeral Home at 6th and Bose, which has recently been restored, beautifully restored, it catered to Black people. Black families would have their deceased persons attended to at the Curtis Funeral Home, after which they would be interred in all Black cemeteries. Even the cemeteries were segregated in those days. So we've come a long way from that, but it's a history that we've kept alive in large part because historians like Caleb and Dorothy King, Dr. Dorothy King, our own education chair, Barbara Barksdale, and others have helped us to bring this Black history really to the forefront of our broader discussion of Harrisburg's local history. And with that, I'll just mention that later this year on Saturday, the 30th of July, Caleb and Dorothy and Barbara and I and others will be conducting our second annual bus tour of local landmarks and sites, and we'll primarily be focusing on some of the African-American landmarks and sites of Cumberland County. So there'll be more about that coming out shortly, but this is something that we've been able to undertake in part because of the support that we get for this programming from TFEC, the Foundation for Enhancing Communities, which has great interest in seeing that our African-American programming is properly supported and presented. The other thing that I will mention also is that, excuse me, Caleb has helped us with a lot of the history of the Old Eighth Ward, and he was one of the co-authors of the book 100 Voices, which are the voices of some of the past residents no longer living who were prominent people in the Old Eighth Ward area. So that's something, we have that book here. It is also at Midtown Scholar, and we're very proud of Caleb and his colleagues for working on that. And a lot of that centers around the Commonwealth Monument, which is the bronze grouping of statues down there on Walnut Street, just south of the South Office Building in Capitol Park, the heart of what had once been the Old Eighth Ward. So that's a great part of our history. We're proud of the fact that Myra Lloyd Dock played such an interesting and influential role years before the women even had the right to vote. And it was very difficult for them to even own property or own businesses, that she could be so influential in the business community in essentially instigating what became the City Beautiful movement. And Harrisburg, because of the leaders of first the Board of Trade and later when it became the Chamber of Commerce, made our version of the City Beautiful really second to none in the entire United States. When you read the seminal book about the City Beautiful movement, the cover of that book has a picture of State Street and Harrisburg, and the other cities that had significant City Beautiful results, such as Denver and Dallas and others, really didn't accomplish anything greater than what Harrisburg did. Really, Harrisburg, we can be very proud of what the civic fathers of this community did in the early decades of the 20th century. And I'm so glad that Ryan wove that into the history of our chamber. And I'm fascinated to learn so much more tonight, Ryan, about the World War II history and the military bases and the role that they played, not only during World War II, but they continue to play a large role in the economy of our region today. And that's another fascinating part of our heritage as well. I think I'll turn it over now to Ashley, if you're there, in case there are any questions or comments that have come in that you want either Ryan or myself or Dorothy to address.
We got a couple questions. Some of them were just clarifications, which we were able to answer online while we were live streaming the video. But one of our viewers did ask, were the hotels that you mentioned earlier listed in the Green Book for African-American travel?
Yes. Yeah. From the notes that I have, they were listed in the Green Book.
Perfect. Someone did ask to clarify, if you remember from your presentation, it was earlier in the slides, who was friends with Woodrow Wilson?
Yeah, that would be Vance McCormick, the mayor of the city of Harrisburg, 1902 to 1905. I mean, again, he ran Woodrow Wilson's reelection campaign, but he was also chair of the DNC and then the American leader of the American delegation to the Treaty of Versailles.
Beautiful. And then someone else had asked for some clarification on which airports were which, the capital city.
So
airport,
Capital City Airport was founded by the chamber, and then I have to look back to the 1930s, right? And then eventually taken over by the state about 6 or 7 years later. And the state, what's up?
That's the one in New Cumberland they were asking?
That is correct. That's in New Cumberland, crosses into York County as well. But as airplanes became bigger, the Capital City Airport didn't have the runway to accommodate the larger airplanes. So when you looked at a way to expand, I mean, in fact, Capital City at one point was Harrisburg York Airport, I believe, as well. And the state owned it and run, I believe, still, and that's now part of the authority, right? That is a part of the umbrella with Harrisburg International Airport. Harrisburg International Airport came about through, that is where Olmsted Air Force Base was. That's sited. In fact, if you go to long-term parking, they're going to be tearing it down soon. But when you take long-term parking on your left, you see old barracks from when it was the Olmsted Air Force Base. They're going to be taking that down to make some improvements for some logistics and distribution. But in fact, I mean, you could see all through the Penn State Harrisburg campus, the older buildings are from the Air Force Base, the Olmsted building, and others on campus. If it's an older building, it's from the Air Force Base there.
And unless anyone has anything else, that was all the questions. You just got a flood of compliments on your presentation on Facebook. So great job.
No, that's kind. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you, Ryan, again, very much. Thank you, Ashley, for being our executive producer this evening. You did a great job. And Dorothy, we thank you, as always, you and the Education Committee for putting together these monthly programs. Historic Harrisburg has been doing fourth Monday programs now for 49 years. We just celebrated our 49th anniversary last week on February 22nd. And that was actually the year or the date that we were founded in 1973, 49 years ago. And almost immediately thereafter, the idea of having monthly educational programs got underway, and they've been on the fourth Monday almost that entire time. And we continue to get great audiences, great speakers, a great way to really promote and illustrate the history of our community, of our region, and particularly the history of what our neighborhoods and our businesses and the buildings and landmarks that represent our capital city. So everybody, please continue to tune into these programs. If you have ideas for programs that you want to see in the future, let us know, send us an email, and we'll share them with Dorothy's committee. And please check our website for upcoming events that are scheduled. We'll be doing some walking tours in the near future. We haven't set dates for any of them yet, but we're planning on a pair of tours pertaining to the City Beautiful, which will take in much of the Capitol Complex, State Street, and Riverfront Park. That will be probably sometime at the height of spring, so that you can enjoy the beautiful landscaping of those areas. I mentioned our bus tour in late July, and lots of other great activities that we're always happy to have everyone participate in and support our efforts. So with that, I guess we can say thank you all very much. We've been here just about an hour, which is what we like to do. So again, thank you and good night.
See you next month. Bye-bye.
Night, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan.